What if the greatest engine of human progress is not genius, talent, or luck, but a deep, gnawing sense of inadequacy? In the shadow of Sigmund Freud, a man worked who argued precisely this. Alfred Adler proposed an idea that turns our understanding of weakness on its head. Our flaws are not a life sentence, but fuel. It's like the first stage of a rocket, which must burn an immense amount of propellant to overcome Earth's gravity. Similarly, according to Adler, a person uses the energy of their inferiority to launch into an orbit of achievement. History is full of proof, from Demosthenes, the stammerer who became Athens' greatest orator, to the Silicon Valley outcasts who built tech empires. This is the story of a hidden law of psychology. To understand how revolutionary Adler was, one must recall the king of early 20th century psychology, Freud. His world was a grim theater of repressed desires, childhood traumas, and unconscious drives that dictate our destiny. Freud was, in essence, a psychoanalytic archaeologist. He believed that to understand an adult, one must excavate the artifacts of their childhood, a repressed Oedipus complex, forgotten traumas. In this system, man was a prisoner of his past, doomed to eternally battle demons implanted in early childhood. This was the dominant view of the human soul cemented in his monumental 1900 work, The Interpretation of Dreams. This is where Alfred Adler enters the scene. Initially one of Freud's closest associates in the Vienna Psychoanalytic Society, he soon became his chief opponent. Adler saw something different in humanity. If for Freud, a person was like a billiard ball whose trajectory is predetermined by a past impact, for Adler, a person is a chess player, constantly assessing the board and striving toward a future goal. He argued that we are not defined by what has happened to us, but by what we decide to do about it. This fundamental schism, which reached its peak in 1911, turned the two colleagues into irreconcilable intellectual rivals. This brings us to the central question: what if the key to extraordinary achievement and personal happiness lies not in eliminating our flaws, but in consciously harnessing them as the primary engine for growth? In essence, Adler invites us to become psychological alchemists, learning to transform the lead of our weaknesses into the gold of our strengths. Can we learn to control this powerful mechanism? This idea was not born in the quiet of a university library. It was born from personal pain. Alfred Adler grew up a sickly, frail child in a Vienna suburb. He suffered from rickets, and his childhood was overshadowed by constant comparison to his athletic and healthy older brother. The turning point came when he was 5. He fell gravely ill with pneumonia, and one day, he overheard the family doctor tell his father, "Your boy is lost." For a child, this was not just a diagnosis, it was a sentence handed down by an authority figure. And it was this sentence that awakened an unyielding will within him. Lying in bed, young Alfred made a decision that would define his life. He would conquer death. He would become a doctor. This wasn't a mere childhood fantasy, it was the first conscious act of what he would later call compensation. After becoming a doctor, Adler opened a practice in a working-class neighborhood near the famous Prater amusement park. There, he spent hours observing circus performers and athletes, people who had turned their bodies into instruments of incredible power. For him, this became a living metaphor for psychological overcompensation. His own physical flaw had defined his greatest goal. This experience stayed with him when he joined Freud's circle. He could not accept that all human motivation was driven by sexual desire. He saw another, more powerful force, the drive to overcome one's initial weakness. As early as 1907, he presented a paper on the study of organ inferiority, where he laid the foundation of his theory. He argued that physical shortcomings often lead to outstanding development in other areas. This view led to an inevitable conflict with Freud, who saw it as a direct challenge to his doctrine. The split in 1911 was painful, but liberating. Stepping out of his mentor's shadow, Adler founded his own school of thought, individual psychology. The name comes from the Latin word individuum, meaning indivisible. He insisted that a person must be viewed as a whole, not as a battlefield for Freudian instincts. Each person's life path is a unique story of how they cope with an innate feeling of inferiority while striving toward a self-chosen goal. For Adler, this feeling is not a sickness, but a universal starting point. He argued that every human being is born into a state of inferiority. We come into this world small, weak, and completely dependent on huge, all-powerful adults. This is not a pathology, but the initial condition of human life. This inherent tension, according to Adler, is like a drawn bowstring. Without it, there would be no flight of the arrow, no achievement of a goal. The feeling itself is not the problem. The problem begins when we respond to it improperly. In response to this innate sense of weakness, another fundamental mechanism is activated: the striving for superiority. It's crucial to understand that Adler did not mean dominance over others. He was talking about self-overcoming, the drive to be better today than you were yesterday, like an athlete competing against their own record. It is the basic life force that pushes us from a perceived minus state to an imagined plus state. It operates in every one of us, whether we are conscious of it or not, compelling us to break through the asphalt toward the sun like a sprout. But how exactly do we move from minus to plus? Through the mechanism of compensation. As a physician, Adler borrowed this idea directly from biology. He knew that if one of a pair of organs like a kidney weakens, the other often grows larger to take on a double workload. He transferred this principle to psychology. A person who feels physically weak might compensate by developing their intellect. Someone who considers themselves unattractive might develop incredible charm and a sense of humor, turning them into their greatest asset. Sometimes this process reaches a new level: overcompensation. This occurs when a person not only catches up to the norm but turns their former weakness into their greatest strength. It is like a broken bone that, after healing, becomes even stronger at the fracture site. A sickly boy suffering from asthma, like Theodore Roosevelt, becomes the embodiment of masculinity and strength. It is in this mechanism, according to Adler, that the source of many great achievements lies hidden. However, there is one critically important component that separates healthy development from neuroticism: social interest. In German, Gemeinschaftsgefühl. This is an innate sense of connection with other people, a desire to contribute to the common good. The same powerful force of striving for superiority can either irrigate fields and bring benefit if it flows within the channel of social interest, or it can turn into a destructive flood if it serves only selfish ends. For Adler, the level of development of one's social interest was the primary barometer of a person's mental health. If Adler's theory seems abstract, history provides us with a gallery of evidence. The most classic example is the ancient Greek orator Demosthenes. As a child, he stammered, had weak breath control, and a nervous shoulder twitch. He was an object of ridicule. Driven by this humiliation, he devised a grueling training regimen for himself. He delivered speeches with pebbles in his mouth on the shore of a raging sea to overpower the noise of the waves and strengthen his voice. He recited poetry while running up a hill to regulate his breathing. The result, he became the greatest orator of Athens, whose famous Philippics against the king of Macedon went down in history. This is a perfect illustration of overcompensation, or consider the 26th President of the United States. In his childhood, Theodore Roosevelt was a sickly, nearsighted boy who suffered from severe asthma and hid behind books. One day his father told him, "You have the mind, but you have not the body. You must make your body." That phrase became his mission. Roosevelt turned himself into a project. He took up boxing, even as president, weightlifting, and most importantly, went to the harsh Dakota Territory to become a cowboy. This experience forged him, transforming the weak boy from New York into a symbol of American masculinity and indomitable will. Oprah Winfrey's story is one of overcoming the deepest feelings of inferiority born from poverty, racial discrimination, and abuse. Early in her career, a producer fired her from her job as a news reporter, stating she was unfit for television because she became too emotionally involved in the stories. This was her weakness. But Oprah turned this vulnerability into her superpower: empathy. Her ability to understand and share the feelings of others, born from her own suffering, became the foundation of her media empire. Outsider status was central to Steve Jobs' identity. He was adopted, dropped out of college, and was fired from the very company he founded. This constant feeling of not belonging fueled his rebellious spirit. He didn't just accept this status, he made it a cult. Apple's legendary Think Different ad campaign is, in essence, a hymn to Adlerian compensation, celebrating the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels who push the world forward. This pattern is visible everywhere. From Wilma Rudolph, who overcame polio to become the fastest woman in the world with 3 Olympic gold medals, to Eminem, who used his experience as a white outsider in a black culture to create a unique style in rap. Think of the artist Vincent van Gogh. Rejected as a preacher and unlucky in love, he channeled his colossal energy onto the canvas, compensating for social isolation by creating worlds of incredible beauty. History is a chronicle of how people have turned their perceived flaws into unique advantages. But Adler warned that this powerful engine can also be destructive. If the drive for compensation is not balanced by social interest, it mutates into its ugly opposite, the superiority complex. It's like a race car with a powerful engine but no steering wheel. The energy is there, but it's uncontrollable and leads to disaster. This is not genuine self-confidence, but an arrogant, boastful mask that hides the same deep, gnawing feeling of inferiority. Such a person desperately needs to belittle others to elevate themselves. In life, this manifests in various ways. It's the boss who constantly criticizes subordinates to hide their own incompetence. It's the person who obsessively brags about their achievements or wealth. Think of certain social media personalities whose lives appear as an endless series of successes and luxuries. According to Adler, this is often a desperate attempt to drown out the inner voice, a whispering of their insignificance. Their goal is not personal growth, but dominance and external validation of their worth. In extreme cases, a person unable to compensate for their inferiority in real life may escape into a fantasy world where they are great and all-powerful. Adler called this a refuge in the symptom. It can manifest as pathological lying, grandiose but unrealizable plans, or even mental disorders. This is the tragic outcome when the engine of growth starts running in neutral, like a car's motor. It roars and overheats, but the vehicle doesn't move. The personality burns out from within. Once again, the watershed between healthy compensation and a destructive superiority complex is social interest. Adler suggests asking a simple question: are my efforts aimed at making the world a better place and helping others, or only at proving to everyone that I am better than them? He believed the answer is revealed in how we solve the 3 great tasks of life: work, friendship, and love. Our contribution in these areas is the true measure of our mental health. It determines whether you are building a palace or a prison for yourself. So, how does one begin construction? Adler suggested starting with courage, the courage to honestly look at your raw materials. He often asked patients to share their earliest childhood memory. He believed this memory was not so much an accurate fact as a key to our style of life, the fundamental story we tell ourselves about the world and our place in it. One must look at this starting point not with shame, but with the curiosity of an engineer studying a blueprint to understand the entire structure. The next step is to stop seeing your flaw as a stigma and reframe it as a task. This is an act of psychological relabeling. You take the label, "I'm afraid of public speaking," and change it to, "My task is to master the art of communication." The content is the same, but the attitude changes dramatically. It's like changing the label on a jar from poison to rocket fuel. The focus shifts from self-flagellation to constructive action, an approach decades ahead of modern cognitive behavioral therapy. This is where what Adler considered one of the greatest virtues is required: the courage to be imperfect. This idea is so modern that it formed the basis of the international bestseller, The Courage to be Disliked. Adler argued that perfectionism is not a striving for the best, but a sophisticated fear of action, an excuse to never begin. You don't need to wait until you are perfect. You need to start now with what you have. The goal is not flawlessness, but progress. Finally, consider how your unique journey of overcoming weakness can help others. Imagine you are not just climbing your own mountain, but blazing a trail for those who follow. Your experience of battling anxiety or insecurity is a map you can give to others. By directing your energy toward helping the community, you not only give your growth a higher purpose, but also, according to Adler, find the most reliable source of happiness. Your personal struggle ceases to be just yours. It becomes your unique gift to the world. And this gift proved to be incredibly generous. Adler's ideas essentially paved the way for a whole new direction in psychology, the humanistic school. Thinkers like Abraham Maslow, with his concept of self-actualization, and Viktor Frankl, with his search for meaning, stood on Adler's shoulders. He shifted the focus from the fatality of the past to the possibilities of the future and showed that our innate feeling of inferiority is not a bug in the code, but the primary driving force of the human psyche. Strength is born not in spite of weakness, but because of it. It is like a pearl in an oyster. It forms as a protective reaction to an irritating grain of sand. Without the initial flaw, there would be no gem. The great individuals who changed the world were not people without defects. They were those who managed to turn their greatest flaw into their most powerful tool, directing it towards serving something larger than themselves. Perhaps Adler's most important legacy is giving us permission to be human. He teaches us that we do not need to be flawless to be valuable. On the contrary, it is our scars and imperfections that make our stories unique. As Adler himself said, to be human means to feel inferior. He did not call on us to get rid of this feeling. He called on us to accept it as a given, as the starting pistol for the race of a lifetime. After all, true strength is not the absence of weakness, but the courage to build a full and meaningful life right on its foundation.